everybody thinks that you have to do a keto diet to lose weight. You have to do low carb to lose weight. They want to eradicate carbs. I am firmly against that type of diet because what I find is this is what I find, and you tell me what you feel about what I'm saying. So I find that it will drastically lower your energy. It will alter your mood, make you feel like shit. Oftentimes will give you constipation. I find the performance in the gym is lacking terribly. I find brain fog and lack of ability to focus. I just feel like the overall quality of life drops. And that's how I feel, or what I've observed in a lot of people. What do you feel about that? And what's your thought on low carb?
Okay. All right. So this is a good one because low carb nowadays it's been bastardized to mean like keto or ultra low carb. So I'm old enough to remember like the low fat of the 80s and the early 90s, and then the switch to Atkins and the South Beach diet and all that. And that I think these dietary trends where people get like this really religious belief about them, they tend to have 20-year swings. And I'm starting to see it swing back the other way where people are now going low fat, high carb. Yeah. And that's the problem with, that's a problem with groupthink and the way, especially our industry and the fitness industry and the nutritional industry, things will swing one way and then it swings drastically the other way and it never stops in the middle. Right. So now I'll preface this by saying I do believe for most people, a lower carb diet is the way to go, but that doesn't mean keto. And the reason I say that is mainly because people aren't really active enough to require lots of fast energy like carbohydrates. People don't train hard enough. People train like absolute pussies these days. Like even my clients, I'm constantly telling them, I'm like, you had 3 more easy reps in there. Like, either you add those 3 reps or I'm going to add more load. Like you want to change your physique, you got to fucking push it. Like, like everything that's worth having is earned. No one's going to give you a gnarly physique. You're going to have to do the work. Right.
100%.
Now let's look at the history of this though, because traditionally, if you look at carbohydrates, traditionally, like a balanced diet would be 50% carbs. So from a traditional clinical perspective, anything that's 40% of carbs or below is technically low carb. So if you look at something like a zone-based diet of 40, 30, 30, that's technically low carb, but people wouldn't see it like that these days because they're used to thinking low carb means Atkins, keto, and all that.
Yes.
But so I would say if I had my choice, most Gen Pop people, unless they were an athlete, would probably do low carb, but you also have to keep that in the frame that I'm looking at that lens as far as 40% being low carb. I think like I'm firmly of the belief that somewhere most people, like if you're a Mary Muffin Top or Gen Pop George, like somewhere around like 25 to 40% of carbs, there's going to be a sweet spot there where you don't have brain fog. You have ample amounts of energy for what you want to do. You get lots of variety of fruits and veggies and some starches and even pastas and grains and things like that. So you don't necessarily have to go ultra low carb. However, that may actually be beneficial for certain people. So
sure.
If somebody is like has a lot of stored energy on their body, they're fat. That's the politically correct way of saying it. But in a lot of cases, people that have a lot of insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome and issues like that, in a lot of cases, doing a really low carb diet is going to be beneficial, but that doesn't necessarily mean to pump the fat up because keto has been misconstrued too. Like it's just people repeating the same dumb shit. So I'm a big believer in if you want to get shit done, kind of base it on more of a zone-based diet and then make your carbs a bit variable depending on what you're doing. Right. So, and looking at it from a perspective of high protein and low energy, if you're trying to diet, if you're trying to maintain, high protein and enough energy, carbs or fats to equalize your calories. And if you're trying to gain weight, high protein and probably pump the carbs up a little bit more.
Yeah. So I love the way that you pointed that out and brought it up. So my general preference, like for myself and for a lot of people that I work with or that I train with or that I know, I like to keep my levels kind of like 55% protein, sometimes even up to 60. And then I'll do like maybe 25, 30 carbs and then 10 to 15 fat. And that's kind of what works for me. Everybody's different, but I like how you brought up what's considered low carb now is what it truly is. Because like when I was talking about it, I'm talking about the people that think that like
2 licks of a dried prune.
Well, yeah, it's like to them, 40 milligrams of carbs is a lot of carbs. I'm like, dude, that's like death. You know, like I don't. When I was in school, when I was in college, they taught us that the only source of energy for your brain was carbohydrates. That was what I learned in my nutrition class. I still remember to this day because it hit me so hard, you know, because even then it was like all the breads and stuff and the carbohydrates. And so I just, and when it comes to muscle building, especially, you're going to need to amp up the carbs a little bit, especially when you, like what you said, when you're working out a lot harder. I don't like high carb. I'm not a fan of that. And like, I don't get into all the carb cycling and all that. I just don't like the stigma against carbohydrates because there's some really good carbohydrates, like a lot of veggies, a lot of oatmeals, a lot of things. There's a lot of really good sweet potatoes, for fuck's sake. I mean, the purple sweet potatoes are so good for you all the way around, you know? And it's like, I don't like the stigma. So you touched on a lot of good stuff there, and it's good for people listening. Carbs don't have to be your enemies. You know, just like what you said about low fat diets for the longest time. I, even as a nutritionist, even like you hear me say, I don't eat a lot of fats. I still don't, even though I know I need them, because it's still in my head from the 90s. You know what I mean? About the low fat shit. And it never went out of my head.
Like no one's ever going to do wrong eating more of an isocaloric diet where you hit something like 33% of everything, and then take away some fat, take away some carbs when you're trying to diet. Make most of your adjustments for your deficit through what's going to provide most of the energy, because we do get energy from protein. Like when you look at a mixed macronutrient diet, you're going to oxidize about 5 to 10% of your protein. When you go into a deficit and your glycogen stores are lower, you're going to oxidize 10 to 15% roughly of your protein. This is why a higher protein diet makes more sense, because you're going to be using some of those amino acids in the amino acid pool to basically create like really inefficient energy.
Yeah.
But see, what's cool about this, and this is why I do like lower carb diets, is if we keep those glycogen stores a little bit low, you can create a lot of things. I call them caloric funnels. So you can look at something like, if I pump my protein up, when you eat that, there's a higher thermic effect. So you get a higher percentage of a reduction in calories just by processing the protein and moving it around the body, right? Yeah. So like fat has a negligible thermic effect, carbs somewhere around say 10 to 12%, but protein has somewhere around a 20 to 30%. So if you take some carbs or fats and eat protein instead, you create a small caloric funnel. And some people will say, oh, it only creates like an 80 calorie deficit a day, and that's like 2 grapes. Yeah, but so what? They go, that doesn't make it doesn't make a difference. But if you take 80 calories, I always have my calculator with me.
I love it.
You take 80 calories and you multiply that by 365 days. That's 29,000 calories that poof, they're gone just by moving things from one macronutrient to another. Now, if I divide that by 7,700, theoretically, it doesn't really pan out like this, but to make things simple, 7,700 calories in 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds of fat.
Yeah.
So that's basically just by taking some fat and changing it over for protein, you can get a reduction of 3.8 kilos or like 8 or 9 grams of body fat in the course of 1 year just by making a macronutrient switch.
I love it.
Then you can use other caloric funnels, because if you do go into a slightly lower carb diet and keep your glycogen stores a little bit lower, you're going to oxidize a little bit more protein, which means you get another caloric funnel. Plus, you're going to take some of that protein to try to make carbohydrates. So it's going to cost you more calories converting protein to glucose. So you can get all these little caloric funnels, and those things will add up over time. So just imagine. So let's imagine that each of those caloric funnels are worth, say, 40 calories. We're just going to make up a number. I pulled that completely out of my ass. That's 120 calories times 365 days. That's the equivalent of 12 and a half pounds of fat just by moving some things around and doing some small little biochemical tricks.
Right. It's amazing. It's amazing when you actually sit. And I despise, I don't want to say hate. I despise that when people do that and they don't even know what they're saying, and they don't take the time to actually look and do the math and see how big of a deal that is. You just broke it down, and that's massive. That's a big ass deal.
Yeah,
so
it's huge.
It is.
I'll tell you where one of the biggest disconnects that I've noticed is that You get people in an evidence-based crowd and they're listening to the scientists.